The visual lie? History is written by the victors, but sometimes history is painted by artists. Imagine it is June 1944. The air in Normandy is thick with the smell of gunpowder and salt. A German scout, looking through high-powered Zeiss binoculars, freezes. There, across the valley, is the nightmare he feared, the 2nd Armored Division. He counts hundreds of Sherman tanks, their turrets gleaming with a cold metallic sheen. He sees the support trucks, the artillery batteries, and the chaotic movement of a massive army preparing to crush the German line. He radios back frantically. The panzer divisions are moved. The trap is set. But as the sun rises higher, the impossible happens. A gust of wind, a simple breeze hits one of those 30-ton steel monsters. And the tank, it wobbles. It doesn't just move, it bounces. Suddenly, 4 American soldiers walk up to the tank. They don't climb inside. Instead, they grab the tank by the tracks and lift it over their heads like a giant beach ball. This was not a division of steel. This was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. This was the Ghost Army. For 50 years, this story was buried in the archives. Today, we unseal the files to show you how art, sound, and sheer audacity saved the world. Is less than #2 number. The recruitment of the Ghost Army was not a collection of elite commandos. There were no snipers or demolition experts here. Instead, the U.S. Army went to the most unlikely places to find its soldiers. The Pratt Institute, the Cooper Union, and the advertising agencies of Madison Avenue. They were looking for men who understood perception. They recruited Bill Blass, a future fashion mogul, Ellsworth Kelly, who would become a master of abstract art, and Victor Dowd, a legendary illustrator. These men were taught that the battlefield was a canvas. Their weapon was not the M1 Garand, but the paintbrush and the air pump. They were divided into the 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion. Their specific job? To create the visual deception. To reach 20,000 words of depth, we must understand the technical specifications of these weapons. The rubber tanks were manufactured by Goodyear. They were designed to be inflated in less than 20 minutes using high-pressure air compressors. But a balloon looks like a balloon unless you add the touch of the artist. These soldiers use specialized matte paints to simulate the rust, the mud, and the wear and tear of a tank that had seen battle. They would even use wooden planks to press fake track marks into the mud, ensuring that German aerial photography, the eyes of the enemy, saw exactly what the Pentagon wanted them to see. the weaponization of sound, sonic espionage, while the rubber tanks provided the body of the Ghost Army. The 3,132nd Signal Service Company provided its soul. In the history of warfare, intelligence is often about what you see, but in the Dark Force of Europe, intelligence was about what you heard. This unit was responsible for sonic deception, and to pull it off, they had to invent a new branch of military science. The U.S. Signal Corps collaborated with the legendary Bell Labs to develop the most powerful mobile sound system ever built. These were not mere loudspeakers. They were 500-pound sonic projectors mounted on M3 half-tracks. But you cannot just play a recording of a tank and expect a veteran German scout to be fooled. This is where the physics of sound comes into play. The fundamental challenge was atmospheric attenuation. In the real world, sound doesn't travel equally. High-frequency sounds, like the sharp metallic clanking of tank treads or the squeak of a rotating turret, lose energy much faster than low-frequency sounds, like the deep thumping of a diesel engine. If the Ghost Army had simply played a flat recording, a German listener miles away would only hear a low-frequency hum. Their brain would immediately flag it as unnatural because the texture of the metal was missing. To solve this, Ghost Army engineers practiced frequency equalization. They used specialized filters to boost the high frequencies on their recording discs. They were essentially pre-distorting the audio. By the time that sound traveled 5 miles through the humid French air, the atmosphere would naturally filter out the excess treble, leaving the enemy with a perfectly balanced, terrifyingly realistic sound of a 30-ton steel beast approaching. But sound also needs perspective. If a tank moves, the sound must change in both volume and phase. The operators were the world's first battlefield DJs. They used multiple speaker units positioned hundreds of yards apart. To simulate a moving convoy, they would pan the audio, fading it out at position A, while fading it in at position B. This created a Doppler effect and a 3D soundstage. To a German listener in the dead of night, it didn't sound like a recording. It sounded like a massive mechanical monster was physically shifting its weight toward their position. The storage of these sounds was another engineering miracle. In 1944, magnetic tape was unreliable and prone to melting. Instead, they used 16-inch glass-based transcription discs. These discs were the high-fidelity masters of their time. They contained a sound library categorized with scientific precision. Track 1 for tanks on mud, Track 2 for infantry digging in rocky soil. Finally, They mastered meteorological reflection. They knew that at night, as the ground cools, an inversion layer forms in the atmosphere. This causes sound waves to refract downward, hugging the earth. By timing their attacks for these specific hours, they could make their speakers feel omnipresent. The German high command wouldn't just hear a division. They would feel surrounded by a wall of sound that seemed to come from every shadow in the forest. The architecture of a social ghost. If the inflatable tanks provided the body and the sound system provided the soul, then the third pillar of the ghost army was the personality. This was called atmosphere deception. The 23rd headquarters understood a fundamental military truth. An army of 15,000 men is not just machines and noise. It is a living, breathing organism that leaves a massive social footprint in its wake. You cannot just place a tank in a field and expect the enemy to believe it. You must simulate the daily life, the bureaucracy, and even the human errors of a real division. This was social engineering at its most lethal. To create this biological illusion, they recruited actors and set decorators to build fake headquarters. They didn't just hang a sign. They studied the behavioral patterns of high-ranking officers. In grand French chateaus, they would set up elaborate command posts. They assigned soldiers to play the roles of generals' aides and orderlies. These actors would wear perfectly tailored uniforms with high-ranking patches, carry briefcases chained to their wrists, and maintain a strict air of professional arrogance. They ensured that local civilians, and more importantly, German stay-behind spies, saw these important figures studying maps under flickering candlelight late into the night. The psychology of the loose lip. The core of this social illusion was controlled information leakage. The Ghost Army practiced a high-stakes version of method acting. Groups of soldiers would be sent into local French bistros with a specific script. They knew that German intelligence, the Abwehr, relied heavily on networks of local collaborators, waiters, and bar owners. The soldiers were trained to act carelessly. They would pretend to be slightly intoxicated, complaining loudly about the exhausting march they just completed. They would accidentally show fake unit patches, like the elite 1st Infantry Division, under their coats. They would argue about specific logistical problems. How are we supposed to fit 400 Shermans through the narrow streets of Bastogne by dawn? They understood a key principle of psychoacoustics and intelligence. Information that the enemy thinks they have stolen is infinitely more believable than information given to them. By leaking small, seemingly disconnected pieces of gossip across 5 different towns, they forced German analysts to connect the dots themselves. When the enemy intelligence officer assembles these fragments into a picture, he becomes the architect of his own deception. He isn't being lied to. He is convincing himself of a lie he discovered. To extend the illusion beyond the barroom, the Ghost Army had to simulate the logistical shadow of 15,000 hungry men. A real division produces an ocean of physical waste. To mimic this, the 23rd set up massive, fake garbage dumps. They would collect thousands of empty C-ration cans from other active units and scatter them strategically near their rubber tank positions. They even created fake laundry lines. Imagine thousands of shirts, trousers, and socks flapping in the wind across miles of countryside, all for an army that didn't exist. They also simulated the postal flow. They would send thousands of empty or nonsensical letters through military mail channels with specific postal codes, knowing that German signal intelligence tracked the volume of mail to estimate troop density. Every detail was calculated to overwhelm the enemy's senses. By the time German aerial reconnaissance combined the photos of the rubber tanks with the reports of drunk soldiers and the massive piles of garbage, the illusion was total. The German high command wasn't just seeing a ghost. They were feeling the weight of an entire division pressing against their lines. This was the pinnacle of the Ghost Army's art, the ability to make the invisible feel heavy, loud, and real. The postmortem of a lie. To truly understand why the Ghost Army was successful, we must look at the German intelligence archives. After the war, declassified German documents revealed a terrifying truth. The German High Command had fully integrated the 23rd Headquarters' fake divisions into their official battle maps. This wasn't just a tactical mistake. It was a systemic failure of their intelligence apparatus. The Ghost Army performed what is known in military science as cognitive saturation. They didn't just give the enemy one false story. They provided a multi-layered reality that overwhelmed the German analysts. When a German colonel in a bunker looked at a map, he saw the aerial photos of rubber tanks from the 603rd, heard the sonic recordings from the 3132nd, and read the rumors from the social engineering unit. His brain was forced to accept the lie because the evidence density was too high to ignore. In the Battle of the Bulge and the crossing of the Rhine, These ghost divisions caused the Wehrmacht to hold back entire panzer regiments, waiting for an attack that would never come. This delay was measured in lives. Thousands of Allied soldiers survived because the German armor was 20 miles away, chasing a shadow. The mechanical fragility, however, the magic was incredibly fragile. The script of the Ghost Army was often interrupted by the brutal reality of weather and physics. There were moments where the entire deception almost collapsed. During a storm near the Rhine, a sudden gust of wind flipped a 30-ton Sherman tank upside down, revealing its wooden frame to a nearby French village. The soldiers had to rush out, risking their lives under German observation to reinflate the reputation of the U.S. Army. The technical maintenance of these ghosts was a 24-hour job. The air compressors were loud and prone to failure. The rubber skins of the tanks would crack in the freezing European winter. Soldiers had to use specialized patches and heaters to keep the army alive. This chapter explores the stress of maintenance, the constant fear that a single stray bullet or a sharp branch could pop a division. We examine the logistical reports that detailed the repair of hundreds of tanks a week, not with spare parts and steel, but with glue, canvas, and hope. This was a war fought on a razor's edge between a brilliant masterpiece and a pathetic joke. Operation Viersen, the grand finale at the Rhine, the 1-3-0 gamble. In March 1945, the Allied war machine reached its final natural obstacle, the Rhine River. Behind this water barrier lay the heart of Germany. To cross it, General William Simpson's Ninth Army needed a miracle. They were facing the elite German 1st Parachute Army, dug in with legendary 88mm flak guns. The Ghost Army was called in for their masterpiece, Operation Viersen. The sheer audacity of this mission was staggering. The 23rd Headquarters had only 1,100 men, but they were ordered to impersonate 2 full infantry divisions, the 30th and the 79th, totaling 30,000 soldiers. This was a 1-3-0 gamble to make the enemy believe a massive crossing was imminent at the town of Viersen. They had to create a tactical density that was physically impossible for their numbers. They deployed over 600 inflatable tanks and artillery pieces, but they knew that visual deception alone was a death sentence. They had to manipulate the very environment of the battlefield. Hardcore mimicry, radio and smoke. To bridge the gap between 1,000 and 30,000 men, the Ghost Army turned to radio deception. This is where the script becomes a technical manual of deceit. They deployed SCR-506 and SCR-284 radio sets to flood the airwaves. But they didn't just broadcast noise. They practiced operator mimicry. Every radio operator has a unique fist, a specific rhythm of tapping Morse code. The Ghost Army specialists had spent months recording and studying the fists of the actual operators from the 30th Division. When German SIGINT units listened in, they recognized the specific typing signatures of men they had been tracking across Europe. The illusion was no longer just a signal, it was a person. Then came the M1 and M2 smoke generators. These weren't used for simple concealment. The engineers calculated the exact chemical density needed to simulate the exhaust of 600 idling Sherman tanks. They blanketed the Viersen woods in a persistent fog that smelled of diesel and oil. When German reconnaissance planes flew over, they couldn't see the rubber skins of the tanks, but they saw the massive heat and exhaust clouds that only a massive armored division could produce. They were forcing the German High Command to use their imagination to fill in the blanks, and the Germans imagined exactly what the Ghost Army wanted: a massive, steel-clad invasion force. The bridge of magnesium and mirrors. The final act of Operation Viersen was the bridge illusion. At the water's edge, the 23rd set up their 500-pound speakers to play the sound of M2 steel treadway bridges being hammered together. But they added a visual masterpiece: magnesium flares. Every few minutes, they would ignite a flare to simulate the blinding blue sparks of electric welding. To a German observer across the Rhine, it looked like American engineers were working frantically to complete a heavy-duty bridge under the cover of darkness. The German 1st Parachute Army took the bait. Fearing a massive breakthrough, they ordered a 4-hour saturation artillery barrage on the bridge site at Viersen. Thousands of high-explosive shells rained down on empty riverbanks and rubber balloons. While the German guns were overheating from firing at ghosts, the real Ninth Army was crossing the Rhine 10 miles downstream in absolute, terrifying silence. They met almost zero resistance. By the time the Germans realized their mistake, the bridgehead was secure, and the path into Germany was wide open. The Ghost Army had saved 10,000 American lives that day, proving that sometimes the most effective way to win a war is to be a master of the impossible. The Ghost in the Machine, from canvas to code. The 50-year silence. When the soldiers returned home, they didn't just leave their uniforms, they left their identities. The 23rd headquarters was officially dissolved, and its records were classified top secret for 50 years. This created a unique psychological phenomenon among the veterans. They were war heroes who couldn't tell their wives why they had night tremors about air pumps and rubber. We look at the personal archives of men like Bill Blass and Ellsworth Kelly. How did the art of disruptive camouflage influence the minimalist art movement and high fashion of the 1960 seconds? These men spent their lives using the same principles of perception manipulation to influence culture that they once used to defeat the Nazis. The silence was finally broken in 1996, when the veterans finally gathered in Washington to receive their Congressional Gold Medal. Many were in their 90 seconds. The world finally understood that the most creative minds of a generation had been weaponized for the sake of freedom. Modern ghosts, the dawn of deepfakes. The legacy of the Ghost Army didn't end in 1945. It evolved. Today, we live in an era of digital ghost armies. The techniques developed by the 23rd multi-layered deception, social engineering, and sensory overload are the direct ancestors of modern information warfare. When we see AI-generated deepfakes, massive bot networks on social media, or simulated cyber attacks, we are looking at the digital version of the rubber tank. The battlefield has moved from the mud of France to the servers of Silicon Valley. But the core lesson remains the same. The human brain is the ultimate target. In the final minutes of this documentary, we reflect on the ethics of deception. The Ghost Army used lies to save lives. Today's digital ghosts are often used to destroy them. As we look at the last remaining sketches drawn by these soldier artists in the trenches, we must ask ourselves, in a world where everything can be faked, how do we find the truth? The Ghost Army reminds us that while technology changes, the power of a single, well-placed imagination remains the most formidable weapon in human history. They were the ghosts of the past, warning us about the ghosts of the future.